Hello and welcome to Ecoholics. A very good evening to all of you. Today we'll discuss the important topic, that is, yesterday India took a decision that India need to hold off the RCEP joining. It means India is not in favor of signing this deal of Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership. Now, just because India is having certain significant outstanding issues, so that's why India has decided to hold off, and these were actually remain unresolved. Apart from India, 15 other countries that are the part of RCEP, that is Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership. This is a grouping of the 16 countries. So 15 among that, they were ready to sign this mega deal in 2020, and they wanted to kick off this deal from 2020. So today is the topic that we'll discuss about the RCEP and why India opted out for joining in RCEP. This topic is very important for all the examination purpose. So either you're giving objective, subjective examination, or related to any, we can say, exam from UPSC to bank to etc. So we can say that this topic plays an important role, because if India will sign RCEP, it will transform our country. So here, if we start our discussion, first of all, I would like to tell you what is this RCEP if you don't know. So in just 2 minutes, a quick recap of this Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership is actually a trade deal, which is, we can say, a mega trade deal among the 16 nations. So among the 16 countries that we have, among 16 we have 10 ASEAN members. So the ASEAN countries, Association of Southeast Asian Nations, where countries like Brunei, Cambodia, Indonesia, Laos, Malaysia, Myanmar, Philippines, Singapore, Thailand and Vietnam. Then we have Australia and New Zealand. Then we have Japan and South Korea, and at last we have India and China. So these are the part of the, we can say, the trade deal, that is RCEP. Now these are the 6 countries that we have: 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. They all have their free trade agreement with ASEAN. So they all have their individual FTA, free trade agreement, with ASEAN countries. Now, what is the purpose of this trade deal? The main purpose of this trade deal is to integrate the market. So, is to integrate the market. Whenever we integrate the market, we can say among the all 16 nations, that would actually facilitate the production as well as the services. So production and services will be available in each of these countries and across this entire region. Now RCEP is the, we can say, largest regional trade agreement, because it includes a major region, and that covers almost, we can say, the half of the population. So that covers approximately, we can say, that this trade pact approximately cover half of the population, 50% of the world's population. It covers 26% of world's FDI. It covers 25% of global GDP, and it covers 30% of all the world trade. So you can understand that amount of the intensity that this deal is actually bringing. Now the negotiation of this deal started way back in 2013, and what the members were expecting, that it will be concluded by 2019, so that we can start or kickstart our trade deal with 2020. Now the question arises, what is the main problem? So before starting this discussion, we understand what India said and what are the other problems that India is facing. Now, as I said earlier, this agreement is capping certain things, like this is obviously the world's biggest free trade deal, but that faced stiff connections from the Indian domestic producers as well. So we can say Indian domestic producers were not ready. Apart from this, all the RCEP countries already get ready with this, except for India. Now, this the text of this RCEP, the text of RCEP includes 20 chapters of this particular proposed deal, and they were expected to implement this in the year 2020. But as I told you earlier, that significant outstanding issues of India that remain unresolved. So we'll see one by one that what are these outstanding issues that India is actually facing. Now, apart from this, if we see that according to our Prime Minister, so Prime Minister of India took a bold stance at the meeting in the Thailand. He said that it actually do not agree or do not actually fulfill their commitment regarding the basic spirit, that is regarding the guiding principles of RCEP, because he says that India's interest or the interest of the Indians they are not able to address. So that's why Narendra Modi, Prime Minister of India, saying that or said that in the meeting, in the statement, he said that that's why his conscience as well as the other countries' people not in the favor of signing this RCEP deal. Now, what kind of outstanding issues we have? There are certain issues like, suppose for example, this is India, and we'll understand from this little flowchart. Now, suppose this is China, this is Japan, South Korea. Here we have ASEAN countries, and here we have Australia and the New Zealand. So more or less we can say looks like the map. Here we can say that if India will receive the cheap amount of imports, especially from China, what will India do? India is having inadequate protection against these imports. Now, this is a major concern for India as well as Indian industries. What they were saying that China would flood the market if India will not address this. Apart from this, if you see that India demanded a scheme called auto trigger. So India was seeking that auto trigger mechanism should be applicable in case of India. Why? Because if you see India's auto trigger means, suppose for example, there is a threshold limit. So there is an upper limit, and if that limit all the imports will cross, what India will do? There will be a auto implementation of the tariff on that particular product if these imports crosses certain amount of limit or the threshold, that is the upper limit. Suppose that limit imposed at 20 billion. It means if from a particular country India will receive 20 billion of imports, it means beyond that there will be a tariff on India's imports. Now, if we see that India is not receiving very well response from the other countries, and what India was saying that the other participants like China, they are also restricting India from accessing or from giving access to Chinese market with the help of non-tariff barriers in the past. So that's why India also want that Indian industry should protect or should give protection against the cheap imports from the China. Now, what India is saying that lowering or eliminating of tariff from the country or country's imports will obviously hurt the domestic producers, and these kind of things will actually hurt in the near term. Now, if we see that this circumvention of the possible rules of origin, because in the RCEP deal they haven't mentioned about the circumvention of possible circumvention that countries may adopt. Like for example, if we will import certain kind of, suppose, goods from China, and we are putting the tariff. If this tariff is applicable to India, what China will do? China will export to Vietnam, suppose, and from Vietnam it will export to India. So that is what we call the circumvention. So in RCEP there is no mention of the concept of rules of origin. Like why India receives a lot of foreign direct investment from Singapore or from Mauritius? Just because of the circumvention. Now if you see the current deal, which actually do not actually prevent the countries from rerouting their the route about their products. Now here we can say China is the biggest we can say partner in this rerouting of the India's products. Now if you see that Indian always having good in, we can say, services as well as the labor force. So these two we have the strength, and the other countries are actually not giving a greater movement to this. It means India export actually professionals like the IT professionals in United States of America, medical professionals in UK. So on the same lines, India is having expertise in exporting the human power, human capital. But here we can say that we didn't get any response, a decent response from these countries, the remaining 15 countries, in order to, we can say, the greater movement of the services as well as the labor. Here we can say India recognized that obviously opening a vast market of India to these countries, and they will export the cheap product that will actually demolish the India's domestic industry or the small farmers as well. Now here we can say bilateral FTAs are always there. Like India is having FTA with ASEAN country, with Japan, with South Korea as well. So most of the RCEP nation is having FTA with India. But here the main concern is about the China only. Or more or less for some products we have Australia and New Zealand also. There's a creating a lot of problem. Now if we see that the favorable outcome of this, that we have to reduce the tariff on all the products for all the countries. So for the safeguard mechanism, there is nothing much more than that for this. Now if you see that India is already having the trade deficit with Japan, with South Korea, with other countries like Australia and New Zealand, that already we are having the trade deficit. But what India's concern is, if we won't provide any kind of protection to these we can say rules, then the countries like China will actually flood the cheap goods into the India via cheap imports. That will hit the Indian industries. Now apart from this, the India is having a poor track record of existing FTAs. Like other trade experts are also raising question. Apart from this, the opposition parties, the left, also actually accusing government that should not sign this RCEP. Although this RCEP negotiation started in 2013 when the government was of UPA. So that particular government also suggesting that the NDA government should not sign or should refrain from signing the RCEP deal. But if you ask a lot of experts, if you ask the other economists, what they are saying, that these obviously, like Jairam Ramesh, one of the famous economists as well as one of the minister in the UPA when this deal started negotiating, he said that, Jairam Ramesh said that it will be a suicidal for India. Apart from this, Indian economy is currently struggling, so that is why it may actually impact India pretty widely. Now if you see that all the RCEP nations already have this particular deal and they were ready, but regarding the India's concern, so they have to take India's call in order to get these things done pretty fast. Now we'll discuss what happened in this particular meeting. Now if you see the RCEP rule or RCEP deal, the impact is on the core interest. Now what are the core interest? It means the livelihood of the India's vulnerable section will affect the most. That is why the India is thinking that we should not sign RCEP and instead we have a trade deal, the FTA, with other countries which India enjoys trade surplus like United States of America, like United Kingdom. After the Brexit proceeding, India will sign the FTA. Apart from this, India will resume its talk with EU about the proposed free trade agreement. So that would be helpful for India because India enjoying the trade surplus with these countries. So that is a very good point made by India after the, we can say, the RCEP meeting. If you see that India has a significant outstanding issues, as I told you earlier, and we need mutually satisfactory way to actually get India's final decision on this. If you see the joint statement of RCEP doesn't said that India denied to sign. What this RCEP said, the joint statement, that India is having certain long-standing issue that we need to address. So all the members will address on the table, obviously. So what India said, that India has participated in a good faith in order to join the RCEP discussion. Obviously, negotiations were pretty hard. Started from the 31st October. So until, we can say, yesterday, that is 4th November. So almost 5 days of hardcore negotiation, but nothing fruitful for India. The next thing we have is, before getting ready this agreement, India should give, or India should get from the members about certain kind of safeguard agreement, like safeguard mechanism regarding the domestic industry as well as the trade concession. If you see the other opinion of the other, we can say, economists, they were saying that the pulling out will give some breathing space for India to think. The former Niti Aayog Vice Chairman, the Arvind Panagaria, also saying that India should implement certain safeguard mechanism, but these safeguard mechanism like anti-dumping duty, these all are available for India under the WTO norms, so we'll not get anything new. But the main concern here is about the farm sector, because if you see the flowchart that we were discussing, mainly Australia and New Zealand will flood the cheap milk products in India, and our milk production will be affected by these cheap imports. So if you haven't seen that lecture of the, we can say, the negotiations on the dairy sector as well as these dairy sector that we were discussing a few days earlier, so you can see that how India is doing well in the dairy sector. Now, apart from this, what economists were saying, that the difference between some other countries and India, we can say China, still persists because India is having around $50 billion of trade deficit. So more than $50 billion plus trade deficit that India is having. To be more precise, it is 53.6 billion. So you can say that India is having merchandise trade deficit even without RCEP. So if India will sign the RCEP, the expected deficit will rise to 105 billion. So that is the expected, the trade deficit in billions, the potential trade deficit, including Chinese deficit as well. So that will hurt the India's, we can say, domestic players. So that's it for this lecture. If you have any doubt, you can ask. Yeah, so the question is, India's trade deficit with RCEP nation is 105 billion, of which China alone accounts for. The statement is somewhat not correct. This that you are quoting the figure, this is the potential figure if India will sign RCEP. So let me correct you. The comment on the comment section that India's trade deficit with RCEP nation is 105 billion. So the correction is that this is potential. It means if India will sign RCEP, India may have the trade deficit of 105 billion. With China, India is having 53.6 billion of trade deficit. That is the correct. Now, next thing is, the worry is about over the Chinese manufactured goods and the dairy products from New Zealand flooding Indian market. So what do you want to say? Are you asking question or are you telling the viewers that this is the correct sentence? So if you have any doubt, you can ask questions. You can always welcome with your questions. Yeah, what was your question? So how it will endanger to India Act East policy and India influence the Indo-Pacific region? Obviously, what the primary concern for India is to look inward first, because India is having a huge market, and whenever you are having the huge market, it means from the all over the place you will try or you will expect some kind of investment or the flow of capital, the goods and the services. So the main concern is that we need to protect the domestic industries. Why domestic industry? Because that provides the employment, stability in the country. That is very, very important. But if you ask me the question that obviously India's its policy will hurt by this, but India is still having the FTA with the ASEAN countries. So ASEAN countries are having FTA with India. So India does not have any impact on the trade with the ASEAN countries. But here the question is, India is having FTA with ASEAN, with Japan and South Korea. The main question is, the problem is China. The problem is Australia. Mainly the problem is New Zealand for the dairy sector and China for the manufacturing sector. So these are the two major concerns. It means what India will get. India is indeed wants to access the Chinese market, the Australian market, the New Zealand market. So these are the things obviously it will affect. And if you ask me, that I think India is holding out for a better deal. That's good, but if India opts out from another amount of FTA, it will be a big loss, or India will become a big loser for this, because we need to take our concerns, that is quite good, and India is taking the strong stance regarding the we can say the India's concern. But every time we cannot do this. If we are not joining, not now, that is also good, but if totally India is not joining or opting out from the we can say RCEP, that would be a great loss for India, because India is actually promoting the globalization, and that is globalization means the free trade among the countries, integration of the Indian economy with other countries. So that is the main thing that India should I think do this, and India should think twice, because it will lead to increased protectionism that will leave the India as a country remain weak, because obviously you were protecting your domestic industry since 1970s. But what happened? They are not now multinational companies. They are not. They are still dwarf. They are still small. So what is the point in protecting these kind of industries? That they cannot actually give the employment as well as the efficiency to the system. So here we can say obviously this opting out from RCEP will raise protectionism in India, and thanks to the protectionism is not competitive. We can say in the long run compete against the imports, that we need to teach our domestic industry. If we not teach our domestic industry how to learn how to compete with against the imports, we can say, then these industry will never become big. Like if you see in MNCs in United States of America, they started with a startup, but now they are multinational corporation. What happened to India? They started with the startup and they remain small. So till when? Now question is till when we will protect these industries? If you see the dairy industry, we have learned from, we can say, other ups and downs in the dairy industry as well. But if you see the cheaper milk coming from New Zealand, for some reason we can say there is no explanation why India could not get against if it is the case of dumping. It means New Zealand will also provide, Indian dairy sector will also provide the cheaper milk. So there will be a competition. So if there is a dumping, then India can act against that dumping. That's a fair case, we can say. If you see the steel producers coming from the Japan and South Korea, cheap steel, we can protect these domestic producer for maybe we can say 6 months, but not for long period. We have to make them efficient in order to compete with the imports. So they obviously, steel producers will actually finish from India, and most industries would happen as because China got the easier access of the Indian market. Now if you see the China, when China was actually bargaining for the WTO membership, and it joined the WTO with having the greater safeguards. But the question is to ask that whether the government could have used RCEP as we did it with the WTO in past. So the meaningful thing here is that we need to implement local reforms. Local reforms, it means we need to promote our industries in order to become then independent, because these poor local policies are always responsible for India's low competitiveness. If India provides the low competitiveness, how our industries will compete with the imports? So forever we'll become a loser, or there will be a loss for the country. That's the main thing that we need. At the time we can say multilateral trade is under threat anyway, but the free trade agreement or the RTAs, that is regional trade agreement, that are only way forward to India. Because if India wants to keep out the protectionism, if India wants to keep the RTA or FTAs in balance, we need to compete under pressure of the cheaper imports. That will actually improve the efficiency of Indian domestic industry as well. Now the easier way is to remove the competition from the industry and not to grow. So if you remove the competitors from the industry, obviously the major thing that they will not opt for the growth. So that is my point of view over RCEP, that India should join RCEP. Although this is a decision, not joining RCEP now is a great one, because India is having certain concerns and that need to address in the RCEP platform. If not, the major concern according to me is not, we can say, what we were discussing here. So major concern is not the imports, not the tariff. Major concern is that India should get access to export services as well as export human capital. So if they are selling cheap products in India, you should also export your labor force. You should also export your services to other countries. So play on your strength. Do not think about your weaknesses. Obviously, in the near term it is good, but in the long term it will hurt India. It will hurt Indian industries, and it will hurt India's competitiveness with the imports. So that's it for this lecture. And if you have any doubt, you can again ask. Otherwise, we'll wind up the session. So this is a live session, and we are meeting daily at 10:30 p.m. from Monday to Saturday, not on Sunday, regarding the current economic discussion and analysis. that is helpful for UPSC examination, IAS examination, both preliminary and the mains examination. Apart from this, if you are giving Indian Economic Services, very helpful for that. The Reserve Bank of India exam and other specialist officer exam in the public sector banks. So that would help you in the long term. So this is what I wanted to say. And apart from this, we are having the courses on economics optional, Indian Economic Services, UGC NET, econometrics, mathematical economics, and all other. And we are starting a new batches, that is from 15th of November, that is for economics optional. So 15th of November we are starting with economics optional new batch. 1st of December we are starting with Indian Economic Service batch. 15th of December we are starting the UGC NET batch, and the same date 15th of December we are starting PG entrance exam tests like for JNU, Delhi University and Delhi School of Economics and other colleges where we require to give the entrance exam like Christ University, Gokhale University, etc. So that's it for today, and if you have anything to say you can mention in the comment box. So thank you for tuning in, and please don't forget to subscribe Ecoholics. Here you'll get the latest lectures as well as the live sessions. So till then, thank you so much. Good night.